The sprawling craftsman house in Oak Creek was silent when they finally pulled into the driveway. It wasn't the heavy, suffocating silence of a place hiding secrets, but the soft, rhythmic quiet that feels like a deep exhale. Dr. Julian Vance shifted the car into park and killed the engine, but he didn't move immediately. He stepped out into the downpour, walked around the hood, and opened the passenger door for Alara, holding a large black umbrella over her head. He held it with intention, shielding her as if the rain itself was a predator that needed to be kept at bay. "Welcome," he said, his voice low and gravelly, sounding as if it actually mattered to him that she was there. The heavy oak door clicked shut behind them, and for the first time that night, the rage of the storm was severed from her reality. The chaos stayed outside. Inside, warm air from the vents wrapped around her shivering frame immediately. The hardwood floors were polished, clean, and impossibly dry. Dr. Vance guided her to a plush armchair in the living room and disappeared for a moment, returning with a thick, fluffy towel, and then another. He showed her the guest bathroom down the hall, making a point to leave the door cracked just an inch so she wouldn't feel confined or trapped. "Take your time, Alara," he said, adjusting his glasses. "You are safe here. The door is locked." When she emerged, her sodden clothes were gone, replaced by a gray university sweatshirt and sweatpants that were far too big for her, swallowing her fragile frame. The rich, savory scent of roasted tomato and basil soup filled the kitchen. It was simple food, nothing gourmet, just heat and sustenance. But to Alara, after hours on the side of State Route 9, it smelled like salvation. She sat at the kitchen island, holding the ceramic bowl with both hands, letting the heat seep into her frozen fingers, then her chest, and finally, her heart. Dr. Vance didn't interrogate her while she ate. He didn't demand a timeline or an explanation. He simply sat in the adjacent living room, reading a medical journal under a warm lamp, giving her the dignity of space. That specific brand of kindness, unasked for and transactional, broke something inside her. She started to cry again, but not the loud, gasping sobs of the roadside. These were quiet, hot tears that fell silently into the soup. Later, when her breathing finally synchronized with the ticking of the hallway clock, he spoke from his chair. "You can tell me the story when you are ready," he said, not looking up from his reading. "Or, you can sleep first." Sleep. The word felt foreign, like a language she used to speak, but had forgotten since the front door of her childhood home slammed in her face. He led her to a small guest room. A clean bed, crisp white sheets, a heavy quilt. He placed a carafe of water on the nightstand and pointed to his own door across the hall. "I am right here if you need anything. No one comes in unless you say so." That night, Alara slept without the paralyzing grip of fear. There was no shouting, no phantom sound of rain in her ears, no heavy footsteps coming to drag her out into the cold. There was just deep, heavy, medicinal sleep that wrapped around her like a promise of a different future. In the morning, pale sunlight filtered through the blinds, filling the guest room with a hazy, dreamlike quality. For a fragile heartbeat, Alara forgot everything. She floated in the comfort of the mattress, suspended in peace. Then, consciousness fully returned. The memory of the rain on State Route 9 slammed into her ribs, and her chest tightened with a familiar panic. But she was not alone, and she was not outside. She found Dr. Vance at the kitchen table, a fresh pot of coffee steaming between them. He didn't force a greeting. He simply waited, and then Alara began to speak. Her voice was fractured, breaking between long, heavy pauses and hands that wouldn't stop shaking around her mug. She told him about the accusation. She detailed Chloe's elaborate, venomous lie, a fabrication born of jealousy that had festered for months. She spoke of Robert and Linda, her own parents, who didn't ask a single clarifying question. They hadn't looked for proof. They had simply opened the door and pushed her into the storm. Dr. Vance didn't interrupt. He didn't gasp in shock or offer empty platitudes. He didn't raise his voice in performative anger. He only listened, his face composed, his eyes steady behind his wire-rimmed glasses, absorbing the trauma like a sponge. When she finally finished, the silence in the kitchen was thick. He sat quietly for a long moment, processing the clinical anatomy of her pain. Then he leaned forward, clasping his hands. "What happened to you is not your fault," he said. The words hit her harder than the thunder ever did because she had been waiting a lifetime to hear them. "I am a doctor," he continued, his tone shifting from empathetic to authoritative. "But I am also a citizen, and a minor should not be treated this way." He began to explain things slowly, laying out a roadmap that felt impossibly solid. "We will pull the school records. We will talk to the administration. We will make sure you are protected. I will help you," he promised. "Not just with food and a bed, but properly, legally." Ilara nodded, her throat too tight to speak. Hope felt dangerous, like a glass object ready to shatter, but it was there, sitting right next to the coffee pot. That house in Oak Creek was not built with bricks and mortar alone. It was built with patience, with warmth, and with a stranger choosing to care when it would have been easier to look away. For the first time since the first drop of rain fell, Ilara believed she might actually survive the aftermath. The truth did not arrive like thunder. It came quietly, step by step, hiding in the mundane administrative places no one had bothered to look before. Dr. Julian Vance started with the simplest things: school records, official attendance sheets, and teacher notes stored in the district's database. The papers spoke clearly. Ilara had been present in AP History and Chemistry on the very days she was accused of being somewhere illicit. Her grades were steady. Her behavior reports were spotless. There was nothing careless, nothing wild, nothing that matched the chaotic story her sister, Chloe, had spun so effortlessly. "This matters," Dr. Vance said, tapping the manila file folder gently with his index finger. "Facts don't shout, Ilara, but they don't lie." Then came the digital footprint. Old phone records, data recovered from the cloud, and screenshots saved by accident. Words sent late at night, then deleted too fast to be erased from the server. When they were lined up together on the lawyer's desk, the story changed shape completely. The timestamps didn't match Chloe's timeline. The tone didn't fit. What had sounded convincing to her parents before now looked rushed, angry, and meticulously planned. Ilara watched quietly from the corner of the room as the adults, Dr. Vance, a school administrator, and a legal aide, read the messages. She saw their faces change, eyebrows pulling together, lips pressing tight in concentration. No one looked at her like she was a delinquent anymore. They looked at her like she was a victim. Witnesses began to speak. A classmate remembered seeing Chloe argue with Ilara in the parking lot days before the accusation. Another student recalled Chloe bragging, half joking near the lockers, that she would make Ilara pay for being perfect. A teacher mentioned noticing a strange, suffocating tension in the house during a parent-teacher visit months earlier. None of it was loud, none of it was dramatic, but together it formed something solid as concrete. The lie began to crack. Not all at once. First a small break, then another, until it could no longer stand on its own structural integrity. What hurt the most was how easy it all was to find. Everything had been there from the beginning. The truth had not been hidden deep in some complex mystery. It had been sitting in plain sight, waiting for someone to care enough to look. Someone finally did. Dr. Vance made sure every step was careful, legal, and meticulously proper. He spoke to child protection officers, to the school board authorities, and to the community leaders who had known the family for decades. He did exactly what Ilara's parents never did. He asked questions. He demanded answers. When the official word finally reached Robert and Linda, they were shocked. They weren't shocked because the truth was unbelievable. They were shocked because it was undeniable. Paper after paper, witness statement after witness statement, digital timestamps that cut through their assumptions like a scalpel. They realized something heavy and bitter as they sat at their kitchen table, the legal notice spread out between them. They had never checked, not once. They had believed one child and thrown the other away without a single question. No verification, no pause for reflection, no doubt, just immediate, irrevocable judgment. Ilara sat in a conference room days later, while adults spoke about her life like it was a case file. But for the first time, she did not feel small. She felt steady. She felt anchored. When the caseworker finally said out loud, "The accusation was false. The words hung in the air, simple, clear, too late to undo the pain, but final. Alara thought about that night in the rain, about her bare feet on the asphalt of State Route 9, about how close she had come to giving up on everything. All of that suffering happened because someone chose an easy lie over a hard truth. The truth had been there all along, waiting, patient. It didn't save her from the storm that night, but it proved to the world that she never deserved to be in it. 7 long years passed without noise. No shouting, no doors slamming, just the productive silence of growth. Alara moved to Chicago with Dr. Vance, and life slowly changed shape. First, everything felt careful, like walking on glass. She studied hard, not because anyone pushed her, but because learning gave her control. Books became a sanctuary where no one could lie about her character. The academic world noticed her quickly. Teachers saw her intense focus, her discipline, her quiet strength that seemed older than her years. One scholarship led to another. Awards followed like clockwork. Small ceremonies in high school gymnasiums turned into grand university halls. Alara stood on stages wearing borrowed shoes at first, and later, designer heels she bought herself. She held certificates that proved what the storm could not erase: her worth. Dr. Vance became more than the man who stopped his car. He became her guardian in every way that mattered. He attended parent-teacher conferences. He asked about her dreams, not just her grades. He taught her how to speak with confidence in a boardroom and how to stay soft without being weak. At home in their Chicago apartment, they talked over dinner, sometimes about medical ethics, sometimes about politics, sometimes about nothing important at all. He never rushed her healing. When memories returned in the night, he listened. When anger rose, he reminded her that pain does not get to decide her future. Years passed, and Alara grew into herself. Her parents heard nothing. No letters, no phone calls, no updates on social media. And instead of searching, Robert and Linda assumed. They told themselves she had run away out of shame, that she did not want to be found. That silence meant guilt. It was easier to believe that comfortable fiction than to face the jagged truth of what they had done. Life in Chicago kept moving. Alara volunteered at youth mentorship programs. She helped younger girls with homework. She spoke carefully about justice, about facts, about the necessity of asking questions before judging. People listened to her. Every award she received was a quiet answer to the night she was pushed into the rain. Dr. Vance watched from the back of the rooms, never asking for credit. When someone praised him for raising such a brilliant young woman, he simply smiled and said, "She did the work. She did it all." There were moments when Alara wondered about her parents, not with longing, but with curiosity. Did they think of her when it rained? Did they ever question the story they believed so easily? But she did not reach out. 7 years of silence built something strong inside her. Not bitterness, but boundaries. She learned that family is not only blood, it is choice, it is presence. It is someone who stays when staying is inconvenient. By the time she turned 25, Alara's name meant something in academic circles. She had plans, goals, a future that felt wide and open. She smiled more easily now. She stood taller. She was somewhere else, in a different life. Her parents lived with quiet assumptions and unanswered questions, hundreds of miles away. They did not know that the girl they left in the storm had grown into a woman who no longer needed their permission to shine. Trouble has a way of knocking when pride runs out. It started quietly for Robert and Linda. Bills they could no longer pay piled up on the counter. Phone calls from creditors they stopped answering rang into empty rooms. Letters from the bank were left unopened, gathering dust. Then, one morning, a notice was nailed to their door. Eviction. The house that once felt solid, the fortress where they had judged their daughter, suddenly felt temporary. Robert tried to borrow money. Friends avoided his calls. Family members had their own problems to solve. Linda sold what little jewelry she had left, pawning memories for cash. Still, it wasn't enough. The ground they stood on kept slipping, inch by inch. That was when Alara's name returned to their lips. For years they had not spoken it out loud. It carried too much weight, too much guilt, too much unacknowledged shame. But now, with nowhere else to turn, desperation forced their hand. They began to ask questions, careful ones at first, then desperate ones. Have you heard of Alara? Do you know where she is now? They learned things they were not ready to hear. They learned that she was alive, that she was in Chicago, that she was doing well, very well. She was a rising star, a name people respected. Shame burned in their chests, but need burned hotter. They traveled to the city with tired bodies and empty hands. The bus ride felt longer than it should have. Every mile carried memories Robert did not want to face. Linda held her handbag tightly, her knuckles white, her thoughts loud and painful. The night they pushed Alara into the rain played in her mind again and again, a loop of cruelty she couldn't turn off. When they arrived in Chicago, they did not look like parents coming to visit a successful child. They looked like people who had lost everything. They stood outside a clean, modern medical building, unsure, afraid. Robert's voice shook when he finally asked the security guard for directions. When Alara's name was spoken, people looked at them differently, with curiosity, with distance, as if they didn't belong in her world. Alara was called from her office on the 4th floor. When she stepped into the hallway and saw them, time seemed to pause. Her parents looked smaller, older, broken in places she did not recognize. Her mother's eyes filled with tears immediately, the kind that come from exhaustion as much as emotion. Her father could not meet her gaze. He stared at the polished floor tiles as if they held the answers to his failures. "Alara," Linda whispered, like the name might disappear if she said it too loud. For a moment, no one spoke. The air was heavy with everything that had never been said for 7 years. Robert's knees nearly gave out. He reached for the wall to steady himself. We need help," he admitted. The words tasted bitter, like ash. "We have nowhere else to go," they cried then. Not quietly, not with dignity. They apologized between sobs, their composure shattering in the fluorescent light of the hallway. They spoke of mistakes, of misunderstandings, of being misled by others. They asked her to forgive, to come home, or rather, to let them come into her home to save them. Alara listened. She saw not love, but desperation. She saw not accountability, but fear of loss. They had not come when she was alone and cold on State Route 9. They came when they times were alone and cold. The roles had changed completely. She spoke gently, but her voice did not shake. She did not raise her voice. She did not insult them. She simply said, "I am alive because someone chose me when you didn't." The silence that followed was heavy. That day, they came begging for the daughter they once abandoned. But they did not find a broken girl desperate for approval. They found a woman who had already learned how to stand without them. The private office in Chicago was quiet and bright, the kind of place that smells like expensive leather and old books. Robert and Linda walked in slowly, holding each other like the ground might move beneath their feet. They had been told to come here for a formal meeting. They did not know why. They only knew it had something to do with Alara's legal representation. At the front desk, Robert gave his name, his voice barely a whisper. The receptionist looked up, then smiled politely. "You're here to see Dr. Julian Vance," she said. The name hit Robert like a sudden wind. Asterisk, Dr. Julian Vance. Asterisk, something about it felt familiar, a ghost from a memory he couldn't quite place. They sat and waited. Linda's fingers twisted the edge of her scarf again and again. Robert wiped his sweating palms on his trousers. His heart beat too fast. Then a heavy mahogany door opened. A man walked out wearing a tailored suit, not a white coat, but the authority was the same. Confident steps. The staff greeted him with respect. "Good morning, doctor." "Thank you, doctor." Robert stood up too quickly. It was him. The umbrella, the rain, the road, the night they tried to forget. Robert's hands began to shake uncontrollably. "Doctor." Vance looked at them. Recognition settling slowly on his face. He did not look surprised. He did not look angry. He simply nodded like a man who had known this moment would come eventually. "Please," he said calmly, gesturing to his office. "Come in." Inside, everything was neat. Diplomas on the wall, awards, photos from medical conferences, proof of a life built on purpose and integrity. Robert could barely sit. His chest felt tight. Then the door opened again. Ilara walked in. She was not the shaking girl from the rain. She was calm, well-dressed in a blazer, her posture straight, her eyes clear. She greeted the receptionist politely before turning to face her parents. "Hello," she said. That single word broke something inside them. "This is Ilara," Dr. Vance said, his voice steady. "She is under my guardianship." Guardianship? The word echoed loudly in the room. Dr. Vance continued. "She is also an award-winning researcher and a scholarship recipient. I am very proud of her." Robert stared at his daughter like he was seeing her for the first time. Pride tried to rise in his throat, but guilt crushed it immediately. Linda's tears fell freely now. "You," Robert whispered, pointing a trembling finger at the doctor. "You were the man that night." "Yes," Dr. Vance replied. "On State Route 9, in the storm, the truth landed like thunder. The stranger they never thanked, the man who picked up what they threw away, the life Ilara had because someone else chose her." Robert's hands shook harder now, not from cold, but from realization. Ilara stood quietly, not smiling, not angry, just present. "You left me in the rain," she said softly. "He brought me home. No shouting, no insults, just truth in that office surrounded by white walls and bright light." Robert and Linda finally understood what the storm had taken from them, and it was far more than they could ever get back. The office was still buzzing from the revelation, but the hardest moment was yet to come. All eyes turned to Chloe, the sister who had started it all. She stood frozen near the door, her hands twisting nervously in front of her. The weight of 7 years pressed down on her like a stone. She looked older, too, but worn, not grown. She began, her voice shaking so badly it was barely audible. "I need to say something I should have said years ago." Ilara looked at her quietly, calm but alert. Robert and Linda's faces were pale. Their hands trembled, mouths opening and closing as if trying to catch the words before they fell and shattered the floor. "I lied," Chloe finally said, her voice breaking into a sob. "Everything I told you about Ilara. It wasn't true. I wanted attention. I was angry. I was jealous. I made it all up." The words hung in the air, toxic and heavy. Silence followed, absolute and suffocating. A few staff members who had overheard from the hallway exchanged glances. Robert sank into a leather chair, staring at his daughter, the color draining from his face until he looked like a ghost. Linda clutched her scarf, her lips quivering. Ilara's eyes never left Chloe. She could see the shame, the fear, the regret, but she didn't smile. She didn't cry out in vindication. She just waited. You left me alone," Ilara said softly. "You made everyone believe a lie. You made my life so hard. Do you even understand what you did?" Chloe dropped to her knees, tears streaming down her face, ruining her makeup. "I do now. I see it. I see everything. I was wrong. I was stupid. I am so sorry." Robert finally found his voice, broken and weak. "Why didn't you ever tell us the truth?" Chloe shook her head. I was afraid of being punished, afraid of losing you. I thought you'd never believe me anyway." Her confession opened the floodgates. Memories of the storm, the cold, the fear, all the nights Ilara had spent alone crashed back into the room. Robert and Linda realized too late the damage that had been done. Not just the humiliation, not just the fear, but the trust they had destroyed, the childhood they had almost taken away. They reached out to Ilara, voices trembling with apology. "We're so sorry. We were wrong." Ilara listened. She let them speak. But no words could undo what had been lost. Forgiveness might come someday, perhaps in a distant future, but the time for undoing the past had passed. Their apologies were small, fragile things compared to the life she had rebuilt without them. Chloe continued to cry, confessing everything she could remember. Every lie, every moment she had exaggerated, every time she had made Ilara feel unwanted. Each word dug deeper into the guilt of her parents. In that office, the truth finally stood in full light. The lie that had ruined years collapsed. The family could see it, and yet the cost of believing it had already been paid. Alara felt a quiet power settle in her chest. She had survived. She had grown. She had been abandoned, lied about, and yet here she was, strong, confident, unbroken. The storm that once held her hostage had passed. But its lesson remained. Some truths, when finally told, hit harder than thunder. And some lies, when exposed, leave wounds that can never fully heal. Alara sat on the concrete embankment along the shore of Lake Michigan, the water stretching wide and endless before her like a sheet of hammered steel. The sun was just rising over the horizon, turning the rhythmic waves into ribbons of gold and silver. She pulled her wool coat tighter around her shoulders, letting the cool, crisp breeze wash over her face. The lake was calm now, rhythmic and steady, but she remembered the storm. She remembered the thick, wild rain of State Route 9, the thunder that shook the earth beneath her bare feet, and the mud swallowing her steps. She thought about that night in vivid detail, about her parents closing the heavy oak door on her face, believing a lie without a single question. She thought about Chloe, her sister, who had lied so easily, so carelessly, to protect her own fragile ego. She remembered how profound the loneliness felt, walking on the shoulder of the highway, cold, scared, and utterly discarded. And yet, she also remembered the stranger who had stopped, Dr. Julian Vance. He had not asked what she had done to deserve the rain. He had only asked if she was hurt. He had chosen kindness when everyone else she knew had chosen doubt. The storm had taken a lot from her. It took her childhood innocence, her blind trust in authority, and her inherent sense of safety. But it had also given her something unexpected, something ironclad: strength. She had learned that love can disappear in an instant, but resilience can appear in its place to fill the void. She learned that the people who are biologically meant to protect you might fail, but strangers or chosen family can rise to the occasion when it matters most. She looked at the Chicago skyline behind her and realized that forgiveness did not mean returning to the past. It did not mean opening the door to those who had abandoned her when she was most vulnerable. Forgiveness was a gift she gave herself to let go of the acid of anger without letting it control her future. She could forgive without forgetting. She could forgive without allowing them back into the sanctuary she had rebuilt brick by brick. Alara's lips curved into a quiet, imperceptible smile. She had survived the storm. She had walked through it barefoot and trembling and come out whole on the other side. The people who left her behind would have to carry the crushing weight of their choices for the rest of their lives. And she? She would carry hers with grace. Asterisk. They left me in a storm because it was easier than doubt. A stranger saved me because he chose humanity. And when my father's hands shook in that office, it wasn't the cold he felt. It was the weight of what he lost. Asterisk. The lake lapped gently at the concrete below her feet, and for the first time in 7 years, the storm felt far away. She was free, and the life ahead was entirely, beautifully hers.